I noticed the dog because he did not belong. A scruffy thing, small and low to the ground, shivering beneath the chapel awning as mourners huddled under black umbrellas. He watched the service with unnerving stillness. Not a whine, not a twitch. When they lowered the casket, he stood. But he did not follow us to the cars. He turned and limped the other way. I came back the next morning to clean up the petals and found him again, lying by a grave 3 rows over. Not the fresh one, not even the right name. He had dug a shallow hollow beside it, just enough to curl into. By the 3rd day he was still there, unmoving, rain pooling around his paws, refusing food, ignoring crows. He was waiting, that much was clear, but this grave was supposed to be empty, and someone had left it open.
Like the video and share it with your friends. Subscribe to our channel for daily emotional dog stories. Turn on notifications so you never miss an update.
I noticed the dog before the casket touched the soil. He stood at the edge of the cemetery, just far enough not to be seen unless you were looking, a blur of wet fur and bone under a cracked sky. The mourners spoke in low voices. I heard none of it. I was watching him, or maybe he was watching us. The ceremony ended, and they drifted away like fog. Black coats, tight arms, half-hearted hugs. I stayed behind, kneeling beside the freshly turned earth, arranging lilies in the way I always did, petals facing east, stems tucked close. Habit, not reverence. When I finally stood, the dog was gone. The next morning I came early. Rain had fallen again. Everything was slick and shining like the ground itself was sweating grief. I stepped over the garden stones and turned the corner of the chapel. He was there, 3 rows over, curled beside a different grave, not the one we had buried. Not even the same family, just a blank-faced stone so old the name had faded under moss and years. He lay with his back to it, chin on paws, still as death. A hollow had been scraped into the dirt, shallow, just enough to cradle his shape. I approached slowly, no sudden moves. My boots sank into the wet grass. I whispered something I do not remember what and placed a small bowl of water beside him. He did not flinch, did not drink, just blinked slow and steady like he was dreaming with his eyes open. Each day I came, he stayed. I brought bits of bread, cheese, chicken once, soft and warm, nothing touched. I began to think he was waiting to die. But his eyes said otherwise. They were full of watchfulness, not hunger, not pain, just waiting. I started checking cemetery records. I told myself it was curiosity, but that was a lie. I needed to know why that grave. Why him? The stone he lay beside had no fresh burial, no flowers, no record of maintenance. The last name etched there had been born over 80 years ago, died in their 40s. No next of kin listed, just an address long since swallowed by construction. I walked through the rows on my lunch breaks looking for clues, broken stems, scraps of cloth, disturbed earth. Nothing, only him, always in the same place, always watching something I could not see. Then one morning the bowl was overturned. Mud streaked with paw prints, the hollow deeper. His paws were dirt-caked, but he lay motionless, his body curled tight around something I could not see. I knelt beside him. My fingers found it before my eyes did, a rusted object, cool and sharp. I dug gently until it came free, a locket, oval, hinged. I pried it open with care. Inside, no photo, just a coil of hair, pale, delicate, sealed under time and silence. It had no scent left. Just a feeling, thick and immediate, like stepping into a room you once loved and barely remembered. I took it with me. That night I dreamed of footsteps in the chapel, wet fur brushing against wood, of a dog standing beside a casket that had not yet arrived. I returned early, earlier than usual, sky still the color of old bruises. He was already there. Sitting now not curled, facing the stone, stiff-legged. The locket was gone from my pocket, my heart clenched. I walked to the records office. The old man behind the desk looked at me sideways when I asked for the plot chart. He shrugged, handed over a yellowed map. That plot, he said, had no owner, never did. I stared at the chart, tracing the lines, a blank square. No name, no registry, just a grave that should not exist. That evening I walked past the chapel again, past the new grave we had just filled last week, flowers already wilting. The dog sat still as always, but something had shifted. The earth beneath him looked fresh, not just damp, not just disturbed, turned, as if someone or something had opened it from below. I dropped to my knees, pressed my palm to the dirt. It was warm. I do not know how long I stayed there. Long enough for the street lamps to flicker on, long enough for my knees to ache and the air to turn metallic with cold. He watched me, always he watched. When I finally stood, he did not move. I turned and walked home, the memory of that warmth burning against my skin like a secret. The next morning he was gone. I searched the rows, called out, though I had never named him. Asked nothing, demanded nothing, only silence answered. But the hollow was deeper now, wider. The locket sat on top, glinting like an eye, and beside it a photograph. New. It showed a man I did not recognize standing in front of the chapel steps, a bouquet in one hand, the dog beside him looking up. The man wore a florist's apron. My apron, I dropped it, ran inside, pushed open the storage closet, heart thudding like a war drum, pulled out the old ledgers, the ones from before my time. Found the name, not on the grave, not on any list, but written in the margin beside a flower order from decades ago. Jasper, for E. Rowan. Return weekly, don't forget, he waits. I sat on the floor, ledger open on my knees, hands shaking. The grave was never registered because it was never supposed to be used. It was a promise, a placeholder, and Jasper, the dog with the torn ear, the one who waited beside it day after day, had been keeping it. For someone who never came home, or maybe never left. I sat with the ledger open long after the room had grown dim. No pages turned, no clocks ticked. Just the whisper of something unseen shifting through the chapel's hollow silence. Jasper. His name felt both strange and right in my mouth, a name meant to be spoken softly, like a memory, like an apology. For E. Rowan it had said, and I knew that name, Elspeth Rowan. She was not buried here. She had no grave in our records, no plot, no stone, but I remembered her. The way older staff whispered the name, always in fragments. A delivery girl who had gone missing, a florist's apprentice, a heart too fragile for the world. Nobody ever finished the sentence. I closed the ledger gently as if not to disturb it. My hands trembled. I wiped them on my apron and stood. The light from the chapel windows had gone blue, that eerie color that falls just before night fully arrives. I told myself I would walk home. Instead, I went to the grave. It looked the same, quiet, unremarkable, but the hollow was gone. Smoothed flat like it had never existed. The grass pressed down carefully, too neatly for wind or paw. The photograph was gone too, the locket, everything. He had cleaned up after himself. I should have felt afraid, but I did not. I felt like someone had pressed a cold hand to my chest and held it there until the heat drained out. I knelt, hands to the damp soil, breathing in the scent of earth and wet roots. Something beneath me pulsed, not a sound, not a movement, but a presence. I whispered her name, Elspeth. No answer came. The next few days passed in a fog of half-sleep and shadow. The florist's shop buzzed around me. Orders came in, bouquets went out. Sympathy lilies, anniversary roses, apology tulips. My hands moved on their own, tying ribbons, trimming stems, wrapping cellophane with a practiced grace I did not feel. I kept glancing toward the chapel through the side window, watching for movement, waiting for that small shape to reappear among the stones. He did not come. By the fifth morning, I broke. I left the shop before opening, walked through fog so thick it softened every sound. The gate creaked when I opened it. The air felt damp and heavy with waiting. I passed rows of familiar names, each one a story I had learned through whispered prayers and crumpled cards, but none of them felt like his. When I reached the old stone, the one with no registry, no record, no visitors, I stopped short. He was there. Jasper curled in the hollow once again, fur darker now as if the rain had seeped into his bones. Eyes closed, still, I thought he might be dead. I knelt beside him slowly. My hand hovered above his ribcage, he breathed shallow but steady. When I touched him, his eyes opened. Golden, tired, but not surprised, I spoke his name aloud. He blinked once as if to say, yes, that is who I was. I looked down at the grave. The grass there was torn, not dug, not scraped. Torn as if something beneath had pushed upward, and in the center of the disturbance, a handkerchief, white, frayed, embroidered with a single letter in dark blue thread, E. I picked it up carefully. It smelled faintly of rosewater and dust, and something else I could not name. I looked at Jasper. He stared at the stone, and then he stood, slowly, bones stiff, muscles unsure, but he stood, turned away from the grave, looked back at me and then began to walk, not down the path, not toward the gate, toward the far wall, the one overgrown with ivy, the one nobody ever climbed. I followed. The wall was only shoulder high. Jasper slipped through a narrow gap where bricks had loosened. I hesitated, heart pounding. Then I climbed after him, thorns catching on my sleeves, moss slick under my palms. On the other side was nothing but brush and tangled trees, and a cabin, tiny. Half collapsed, hidden from view, I had never known it was there. Jasper sat by the door waiting. I stepped forward, pushed the door open with a creak that sent birds scattering from the branches above. Inside was dust, and silence, and stories. The air smelled of dried herbs and forgotten rain. There was a cot, a rusted basin, a book with flowers pressed between the pages, and in the far corner on a small table, a bundle of letters tied with black ribbon. I reached for them. The top one was addressed in neat script, to the one who comes after. I read the first letter right there, standing in the dust with Jasper at my feet. The handwriting was delicate but sure, the words careful, worn by time. If you are reading this, then I am truly gone. I left no stone for myself. I left no name to mourn, only him. He will wait. He always waits. I sat down, letter in hand. Tears I had not expected welled up and fell before I could stop them. Jasper laid his head on my knee, warm and real and solid. I read every letter. There were 17, each one a fragment of a life folded into silence. A girl who fell in love with another woman's voice. A promise made in a time when such promises were dangerous. A plan to escape. A dog trained to wait. She had never left, not truly, not while he remembered. The last letter ended with a single line. Do not bury me, just remember where I waited. I buried her that night, not in the plot with the stone, not in the empty hollow Jasper had guarded for years, but behind the cabin, under the roots of the old tree that leaned just enough to hide the dawn. Jasper watched. He did not move, not until the final shovel of earth was pressed down, not until I placed the locket on top and whispered her name one last time. Then he turned. Walked to the base of the tree. Curled up and slept, not like before, not waiting, resting. I stayed until morning. When the sun rose, he was gone, and for the first time I knew he would not be back. The chapel was quieter after that, not the kind of quiet you notice with your ears, but the kind that settles into the corners of a place, as if something heavy had been lifted and carried off in silence. Customers still came, flowers still bloomed, babies were still baptized, people still died. But the path that once led to Jasper's Hollow grew wild with forgetfulness. I found myself walking it anyway. Every morning I carried fresh petals in my apron pocket and stepped around the muddy prints that no longer appeared. I checked the grave 3 rows over, the one he had watched for so long, still there, still empty, still wrong, but it did not feel the same. I suppose it was me who changed. After I buried Elspeth behind the cabin, I returned 3 times. Each visit I brought something she had left behind, a letter, a pressed violet from her journal, the silver comb I found in the drawer beneath the cot. Rituals are for the living more than the dead, and I performed them like prayers. The dog did not return. The grave remained undisturbed, but the wind moved differently through the ivy wall, and the trees no longer leaned quite so far from the light. It was during one of those visits to the cabin that I found the notebook. Small, leather-bound, tucked beneath the floorboard that creaked under the edge of the bedframe. I would not have found it if I had not dropped my keys. I bent to retrieve them and felt the loose plank shift under my knee. Inside the notebook, sketches, Jasper again and again. From every angle, nose down, ears perked, eyes closed, and beneath each sketch a single word, wait. Some pages had poems scribbled in the margins, barely legible beneath smudged charcoal lines. One read, if love is a place, then I have lived in it without walls, without windows, only the sound of him breathing beside me. I closed the notebook gently and held it against my chest. The trees outside rustled like someone whispering yes. Later that week, I tried to tell someone what had happened. I chose Annie, the assistant from the flower shop. She was kind, practical, and rarely rattled by things like grief or mystery. I told her about Jasper, about the grave, about the photograph that showed me in a time I never lived. Her eyes narrowed, not in disbelief, but in defense. You've been working too much, she said, stirring honey into her tea. People see things when they're tired, maybe, but I had not seen Jasper. I had met him. I had buried the woman he waited for. And I had touched the dirt that breathed, so I stopped trying to explain. Instead, I visited the chapel after closing hours, sat in the third pew with the last light of the day spilling through the stained glass in fractured ribbons. Sometimes I brought the notebook. Sometimes I just sat with my hands folded in my lap, waiting without reason. That is when the letters began. The first one came wrapped in twine, no return address, slipped through the chapel door. My name in black ink across thick cream paper. Inside, a clipping, an obituary from another town, another year, another woman who had gone missing in the late 60s. Elspeth's cousin. Name. Rowan. A note was paper-clipped to the back. They never found her, but she wrote the same name in her diary, Jasper. The second letter came a week later. Photographs this time, black and white, blurred with time. One showed a group of women standing in front of what looked like a field hospital. One woman had her arm around a dog, not Jasper but close. Same torn ear, same eyes. On the back, Italy, 1943. The third envelope was empty, just a small circle drawn in pencil. A gravestone, I realized, unmarked, just like Elspeth's, and then they stopped. Weeks passed with nothing new, no letters, no signs. The cabin remained empty, the grave silent. But I had changed, and I could not pretend otherwise. I started bringing flowers to other forgotten graves, ones whose stones had cracked or faded beyond reading. I left little notes behind, sometimes pressed herbs, sometimes old coins, sometimes nothing but the petals from my pocket. People began to notice. They asked why I tended graves that had no names. I told them the truth. I said, because someone once waited, because love does not always end in a way you can see. Because sometimes a hollow in the dirt holds more meaning than marble ever could. Some nodded, some looked away. One woman cried and asked if I had seen her dog. He had gone missing 3 years ago, looked a bit like a fox. One torn ear, I asked his name. She whispered Jasper. I led her to the grave. We stood there silent. She knelt, touched the dirt, said nothing. I did not speak. Sometimes quiet is the only language grief understands. Before she left, she turned and asked, do you believe in ghosts? I said, only the ones we choose not to bury. She nodded. I think she understood. That night I dreamed of the chapel, empty pews, candlelight, and Jasper standing at the altar, head turned as if waiting for the door to open. I woke with tears on my face and the sound of wind pressing gently against the windows. It felt like goodbye. But it was not an ending. It was the moment you stop watching the door and begin tending the garden. The cemetery changed with the season. Leaves clung to the trees longer than they should have, as if the wind was too tired to finish its work. The ivy along the chapel wall darkened. The earth turned brittle and quiet beneath my feet. And still I walked the rows. I no longer looked for Jasper, not in the way I had, not with hope, but with memory. I carried him with me, his absence shaping the way I moved through this place, like the memory of light in a room after the candle has gone out. The grave was still there. 3 rows over, flat, untouched. But I noticed something strange. Grass no longer grew over the hollow. It tried. Each week I watched blades sprout, push up through the dirt and wither, not from trampling, not from frost, just refusal, as if the ground itself remembered. One morning I brought a small wooden stake. I pressed it into the soil just behind the stone and tied a ribbon to the top, simple twine knotted with care, not a marker, not a message. Just a sign to myself that something had happened here. The next day it was gone, the twine, the stake. In its place, a single dog print pressed perfectly into the earth, not fresh, not recent, just there, as if it had always been. I knelt and placed my hand beside it. Smaller than my palm, deep enough to catch morning dew, and for a moment, no longer than a breath, I smelled rosewater. I stayed until the shadows stretched long across the headstones. I said nothing. That night the bells in the chapel rang on their own, just once. No wind, no visitors, no one inside but me. I lit a candle, I whispered thank you, and then I walked home. A few weeks passed before the letters resumed. This time the envelope was heavier. Inside, an aged photograph folded into 4. It showed the cabin in better days, roof intact, garden blooming in wild tangles, light streaming through the open door. A figure stood in the threshold. Elspeth, I knew it instantly. Her hand rested on Jasper's head, his ears perked, his body alert. On the back, written in blue ink, he waited in life too, not just in death. I carried the photo with me for days, unsure where it belonged, not with the letters. Not in the chapel, not in the earth. I placed it under the floorboard in the cabin beside the sketches, a new page in the story they had started together. Winter came slow that year. The snow arrived late, dusting the chapel roof like powdered sugar, delicate and uncertain. People still died, people still prayed, but there was a stillness in the cold that reminded me of him. One morning, after a frost-heavy night, I saw something that stopped me, a trail of prints, dog prints. Crossing from the ivy wall, weaving between the headstones, curving toward the grave. Not recent, frozen mid-step, preserved like pressed flowers, they stopped beside the hollow. No return trail, just a beginning, no end. I stood there longer than I should have, cold in my shoes, breath fogging the air, but I understood. He had come back not to wait, to leave. In the months that followed, the chapel began to change again. More people visited the older graves. Some came with questions, some with stories, others with flowers and names they could no longer trace. They asked me why I tended the forgotten, I told them what I could, that love leaves traces, that grief is patient, that sometimes the ones we mourn are not the ones we bury. Some listened, some smiled politely. One old man touched the stone Jasper had watched and said, "He was mine once. Before the war, before the rest." I asked if he meant the dog. He just nodded. Then he walked away, and I never saw him again. Spring brought wildflowers, not just in the tended plots, but in places they had never grown before. Pale blue petals sprouted near the base of the yew tree. White blooms curled beneath the chapel steps. Even the hollow, once sterile, began to soften. I no longer placed food or water there. I left only petals, tiny bursts of color, a kind of offering. One morning I found a collar, simple leather, a single tag, no name, just the word wait. I picked it up, held it to my chest, and cried for the first time in months, not out of sadness, but because I understood what it meant. It had never been about guarding a grave. It had been about guarding a promise. I still dream of him, not often, but sometimes I see him at the edge of the field, half lit by the sun, watching, not waiting, watching. He never comes closer. He does not need to. In the dreams, I always whisper, "You can go." And though he never moves, I wake with the feeling that he heard me. I kept the photograph. I framed it and placed it in the back of the chapel where the light is soft and quiet. No plaque, no name, just a woman and her dog standing in the doorway of a life they built in secret. People see it sometimes. They ask who she was. I say she was someone who loved and waited, and someone who was loved in return. That is enough. It has always been enough. And when I walk the rows now, I walk differently, not looking, not searching, just remembering, because some stories are not meant to end, only to echo. And in the quiet places where moss grows and petals fall, I still feel him, not as a presence, but as a reminder that love once planted never truly leaves, even when the waiting is over.
Dogs truly are the most loyal companions in our lives. What did you think of this heartwarming story? Let us know in the comments. Like the video and share it with your friends. Subscribe to our channel for daily emotional dog stories. Turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Click here to watch the next story of love, loyalty, and the incredible bond we share with our paw-some friends.